Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, I assure you. But here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming, especially during these past 2 years. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, and Talking Toddlers, this podcast helps you develop that with clarity, confidence, and clear communication. So let's get started. Hello and welcome back to Talking Toddlers. I'm Erin Heyer, your host, and this episode we will continue the conversation on what is and what is not a late talker by presenting 4 different real-life cases that I've had the pleasure of working in the past year. So I want to kind of set this scenario with these 4 children because they vary quite a bit. And yet there are so many common themes across their lives, right? They're very short lives. They range in 16 months to 30 months. So with that in mind, let me set the stage of what the evaluation process looks like in my office or in my practice after 35 years. It really starts with the initial phone call. I gather a lot of information when a parent calls my office because I feel like it takes so much courage for a mom, most of the time, or a dad to pick up the phone and to really inquire specific questions and concerns and perhaps schedule that first evaluation. But what it looks like and why it's so important is because when you and I talk about quote unquote a late talker, we have to make sure that we're all on the same page, that words matter, expectations matter. So let me just reiterate from last week what's important in a child kind of fitting under this umbrella. There are no other developmental questions or concerns, no medical diagnosis. The behavior and social skills are very typical for that 18-month to 2-year-olds, that the receptive language issues are not a concern. They might be a little apprehensive or slow to respond, but they're able to engage, that there's no history of digestive or sleep issues, sensory or self-regulation, meltdowns or transition issues. And there's no concern in general, based on mom and dad's, parental impressions, that there are motor developmental problems, that they basically, sat up and crawled and are walking within that range. And there is a wide range, but they're still doing it on time and in sequential fashion. Quite often I will meet a child and when we go back in history, realize that crawling was a little sketchy. Maybe they just did it for a little bit, or maybe they needed a lot of encouragement, but crawling is one of those developmental milestones that's really important to brain wiring. And we can talk another time about why and how that works neurologically, but I can at least through the phone conversation with a parent check these things off. So during this phone intake or consult, I really review the pregnancy and the birth history. Was there or were there problems? Was the birth weight low? At what gestation week were they born? Were there difficulties with initial latching on or feeding? All of that information gathering is taken through the phone. And then I explore more in depth in person, and then even over time, because moms and dads, moms mostly because you lived through it, that, there are subtle differences or things that occurred that perhaps you just kind of buried or you forgot about. Once you kind of get past, and when you reflect back, you realize, yeah, gosh, latching on, that was really problematic. And it took days upon days, or I needed outside support or whatever, or I just kind of, chalked it up and said, hey, nutrition is more important. Let's figure out a bottle method. So, but all of that important information during pregnancy, during delivery, and then within those first, 3 to 6 months. All right. So the evaluation process then really includes, I have parents bring in a few of their favorite toys so they can share with me, or at least I can begin to observe, because that's what a lot of the evaluation is. It's not necessarily me with hands on the child, because it's very intrusive. And we're talking about a baby. We're talking about a very, very new toddler. And so I need to gain trust. That's rule number one. So bring in a few of your favorite toys. Also bring in a few of your snacks. And we'll talk about why that eating and chewing and food choices are a huge part of this evaluation process, as well as the tools that you use, such as, do you have a favorite cup? Do you use a straw? How do you, are you still using the bottle? All of those kinds of environmental, developmental tools that you use give me insight of what's going on with that child and where they are in this developmental process, because that's what it is. It's a process, right? There are no absolute wrongs or rights. Well, there are, but we won't go there. But for the most part, a mom and a dad are doing the best they can, and I'm here to help kind of evaluate that and then figure out what can we do to improve it, right? Because there are concerns. Let me answer some of those initial questions. So think about the evaluation, and what I want, one of the primary reasons why I'm kind of outlining this before we talk about my 4 cases is because I look at the whole child, including the family, including all of the different relationships and dynamics that go on, especially in these last 2 to 3 years, how our world turned upside down and family systems are kind of different. And the way that the parents kind of welcomed this new baby into this world was very, very, very different. And so I think moms and dads need kind of reassurance of how and what they did was fine, and how we can continue to shape it to help your child reach their full potential and well-being and healthiness and thriving. I use this kind of outline, right? That I started an in-depth consult on the phone, and then the evaluation process is really upon entering my waiting room. And at one time, 15 years ago, I had a large practice with, 6 or 8 therapists at any given time. And so the waiting room was much bigger, but we still use this process in using the information and letting the child enter a new environment, meeting new people, and see how they tolerated it, how they were able to engage without too much overwhelm, right? So it really starts with entering the waiting room. How do they adjust meeting someone new? And how do they kind of look to mom to get reassurance, right? Is this okay, mom? She's talking to me. Is this okay that I sit down? And that I really need to gain their trust, right? That it's not abrupt. It's not like take the kid and drag them into a clinical room. It's really give them enough rhythm to be themselves so I can get authentic information, right? And that's what it's all about, of gathering who is this child for real and what's the relationship with mom, and can they really work together to expand their little world into this new environment. So are there separation issues? And it's not, again, that I take the baby and go into the back room. Ultimately, that's my goal, for a child to be able to have confidence and security that they can separate from mom and go and work with me. And then I have a one-way mirror, so the parents are always, always, always encouraged to observe. But in the beginning, it's like, can mom even take the child off her lap and let the baby or toddler sit next to her? Or is the toddler confident enough that they will walk around and kind of explore a little bit? I always bring in toys and books and whatnot, and then they have their favorite things from home. Again, helping with security. I want authentic information. But separation issues with mom, are they able to kind of just, look to mom for comfort and yet still explore this new environment? Ultimately, speech-related issues or delayed speech and language, I need to look inside their mouth, but that is not my first priority. However, I do look at the physical structure of the baby, right? Not only their body, but their head, their jaw. And we'll talk about the very specific things that I look for nasal breathing or lip closure, jaw alignment, all of these kinds of things. But in the beginning, it's just gaining confidence. So also part of this evaluation process is that I will hopefully get enough information or enough opportunity to watch them eat and observe some of those oral motor skills that are so in sync with early speech and language. And if I need additional information, quite often I'll say to parents, we can do a series of sessions, which is called diagnostic therapy. So I'm continuing to gather information while helping the parent gather insight and information. So it's therapy at the same time that I don't have kind of an absolute quote unquote diagnosis or category, that I'm evolving with my clinical impressions over time. Also, the parents will take additional home videos and send them to me once again when the child is in their natural environment and eating at the table, and then I can gather information from watching videos as well. So some of the physical developmental markers that I look for in a typical average well-balanced 24-month-old is that they can use an open cup drinking, that they can use a straw without chewing on it, and what kind of straw do they tend to use? Can they eat or bite into a hard cookie with ease and chew it? What is the hand and mouth connection? Are they able to feed himself or herself, again, with ease? Do they use a pincer grip? Can they pick up, because usually that, starts at 10, 12 months of age, but can they pick up small bits of food and put one piece at a time in their mouth? Can they chew with their lips closed? Because that's telling me that their tongue and lips are disassociated or able to move separately from that jaw. If you go back and listen to previous episodes, I think episodes 2 and 3, when I talk about early chewing and sucking through a bottle or a breast, that it's all one unit, the lip, the jaw, and the tongue. Now, somewhere between 15, 18, 24 months, there's really strong and healthy development of disassociation So the jaw can stabilize itself and the lips can protrude like for a straw to suck up, right? And then the tongue tip can elevate to right behind their upper teeth and initiate that more mature swallow. Very different than when they're sucking off of a bottle or mama's breast. A typical healthy, well-developed 24-month can chew with their lips closed. Now, sometimes they can chew, it's still maturing, right? But they have a pretty good mature swallow. So their lips are closed when they swallow. The tongue does not thrust outward between your teeth. You don't see the tongue when they swallow. And what I encourage parents to do upon that first phone call is for them to slow down and break some of their chewing and eating and swallowing skills. Like, what does it take for us as adults to chew and swallow? And when I start talking about different motor planning and organization to these movement patterns, that I want I want a parent to be a little bit more cognizant of what the heck is going on inside my mouth when I'm eating and talking, because there's a correlation. And then another big piece that will require a whole nother episode or series of episodes is nasal breathing. And again, what happens with their breathing patterns when they're eating and chewing and swallowing, but also at rest when they're just sitting there looking at toys or listening to you talk, or just waiting in the car. I encourage parents to look in that rearview mirror and watch their child. Are the lips closed? Are they breathing through their nose? Do they snore? All of those kinds of information is telling me what's going on developmentally, and it's all relevant to early speech and language and talking and listening and attention and self-regulation and all of that. The other pieces of information that I ask for in the early part of the evaluation process is, do they use a sippy cup? And we'll talk about why. And I think any parent should know that speech pathologists and dentists and orthodontists, and I think the vast majority of pediatricians discourage sippy cups, and we'll talk about why. And then also what types of food. Yes, in the beginning of my career, the first 10, 15 years, it was about nutrition, because there was, how well are we feeding our brain? And then the research kept coming out about the whole brain and gut connection. And that's certainly a series of conversations in the future that I have come this spring. But also looking at, the textures of the food is very telling to me. Do they gravitate towards something soft all of the time? Or do they gravitate toward a lot of chewing and crunchy and salty kinds of things? Looking at, whether it's sweet or tart or sour or salty or crunchy, or, all of these different elements give me, the therapist, a good insight of what's going on neurologically, physiologically, as well as emotionally. And then all of that supports speech and language and cognition. And then how do they chew? Not only what do they chew, but can they take a bite off the tip and then move the piece of food with their tongue to their first and second molars and chew? And what type of chew is it? Is it just kind of a munch, 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 swallow me down in a big gulp? Or do they have, or are they developing a more mature chew, which is like a rotary grind, what you and I do? And usually it's fully mastered by their second birthday. It starts to evolve somewhere around 10 months of age. And really, you can see it in most 18-month-olds. And then theoretically, or at least what the science tells us, is that it's fully mastered by a 24-month-old, give or take a month, right? Don't have these absolute markers, but we want it it to be, it's not linear. We want it to be an evolution, a process. That's what development means. And then the other big thing, or the two other things are, is drooling a problem? And if so, what does that mean? Why is he drooling? How much is he drooling? How often? And, all of those developmental markers that fit into that. And then looking at, is there a pacifier still being used? Do they suck their thumb, chew on their fingers, chew on their clothes, all of those kinds of things? Again, giving me more information, the more I understand, then the more I can kind of shape and help the family with supporting a healthier, richer speech and language and early development. Just a side note on nasal breathing, as I said, we'll go into that in a much deeper and additional episodes, but this is a symptom. It's telling me a lot about the child's first year, second year. Overall general development, but it also then gives me insight how well their sleep and their rest and restorative processes are, because again, it's hard to learn, it's hard to grow, it's hard to develop if we don't have good nutrition feeding our bodies and souls, as well as rest and sleeping patterns. Then it can also give me insight. Are there allergies or food sensitivities? Do we need to make a referral, or do we need to play around with some of these and see how he or she responds? And in one of these cases, it was obvious, and mom was open to changing a few things, and things really improved even before they came in to see me. So between the initial phone call and the first time they came in to see me. Then nasal breathing also gives me great insight into structure and function, and what a speech therapist means when we use those terms. Structure is how they physically look, right? Is their jaw in alignment, or do they have like a cross bite, right? I think most people understand that. Or looking at the structure of their nasal passageway, how big is their nose? I will often look at parents, and, there are similar features, right? Even though a 2-year-old or an 18-month-old is still very much a baby, but I'm looking at how all of those physical structures fit together and allow for healthy nasal breathing and good chewing and speech development. And then the function, what happens when they start to use it, right? What happens when they're chewing? Can they close their lips and breathe through their nose? That's important. But also during that function, it gives me insight of the muscle tone. That's really important. If children or adults, and there are plenty of them, are chronic mouth breathers, then we tend to have low jaw tone, right? It's sort of, I always tell parents, it's like if you broke your arm and you had a cast for 6 weeks, you take it off and the muscle tone is weak, it's flabby. That's what happens with our jaw. And that's what happens with our tongue. If our tongue is not disassociated, right? So we don't have good jaw stability and our tongue can't move independently from it. So if they're still kind of like, when they're a baby, 3-6 months old, still working together as a unit, and you have an open mouth breathing posture, it's really low tone will develop over time because of lack of mobility. You don't exercise that arm in a cast and the muscles, atrophy. And that's really what's happening. Or in this case, we're just not exercising it and it's not developing that strength and coordination. So all of these data points are coming at me, within the first 20 minutes of them in my waiting room. And then after the physical and the emotional connection and all of that, then I'll start to look at speech and language. Is the child noisy? Are they responsive to me or to other speech? And if they are noisy and making some attempts to communicate, how clear is it? Do they have a variety and different sounds making? Or is it just repetitive? Or is it more garbled, like in the back of the throat? And then I'll look at vowels. And I've mentioned this before, and I don't think a lot of therapists talk about this, but it's really, really important. By the second birthday, they should have all of the vowels, and that's going to help with speech clarity. And if they don't have a lot of different vowels, then that's where speech therapy should start, right? In strengthening that jaw. And then we take a look, if they are making some different sounds and different vowels, are they putting the consonants in the beginning of the word, the initial position, or the final position at the end of a word? We call it consonant, vowel, consonant, right? Like in the word cat, k is that first sound and t is that final sound. And then you have that vowel. If you can say cat, or you can say kit, or cot, or keet, so all of those vowels in the middle will change the meaning of the word and the accuracy of his or her speech. So at this stage, at this evaluation process, and when I begin to introduce these 4 cases that I've had the pleasure of working, I want to reassure parents, and I want to reassure you, mom, right now, to be honest, to be open, and to be gentle with yourself, gentle with your child. I always say a child will grow and learn and listen to you and learn how to talk if they can. If they're struggling, or if you're struggling, it's just because they don't know how yet, or it's just because you don't know what you don't know. And that's kind of my rule or my mantra going into 2023, is to really help moms and dads and grandparents and even educators. Honestly, you don't know what you don't know, and be easy, be gentle on yourself. But at the same time, be curious and want to gather more information and improve, or parenting is a work in progress too, just as growth and development is. So babies, your beautiful baby, your beautiful toddler didn't come with a manual. Kids do vary quite a bit, but there are still expectations. Pediatricians are great for many, many things, but they don't have a lot of specific training in development. It's very cursory. So I encourage parents to go and get additional information, continue to ask questions. The systems out there, quote unquote, the medical community, the educational system, I don't think, unfortunately, were working very well before the pandemic. And now I think they're even more overwhelmed. And the bureaucratic policies, that whole procedural nightmare, has gotten worse and more complicated. And there's a backlog. There was a backlog before COVID, and there's definitely a backlog now. And like I've always said, modern life is complicated. It's confusing most of the time. And because of the wealth of information, it can be misleading. So the other aspect is waiting is never the best policy. If you have questions or concerns, listen up, ask questions, and be ready to take back control. Even if you don't have all the answers yourself, know that they're out there for you. And hopefully you're getting some of your questions answered here. So let me set the stage of what the 4 real life cases are. And I want you to keep in mind what that evaluation process is for me. I gather a lot of information on the phone consult. I never, ever, ever just have a child walk into my office and I'm kind of cold, right? I don't know, where they're coming from. I don't know what the parents' concerns are. and that I have a lot of background information, and I have a lot of good vibe with spending time on the phone with mom. So, but these 4 real life cases, they're children that I would say fit the late talker profile, right? And that they're between 16 and 30 months of age. There are no other medical complications, no other major concerns. Now, what you'll see as I unfold these cases, there are subtle or soft signs that I think contribute to the speech delay, but it's not the underlying cause or that what we term as the etiology, right? And there's a lot of variability, both in how they first present themselves, the family dynamics, and what the outcomes are. But I'm here to say all 4 of them are in a significantly better place, and I will kind of give you what the next steps are. But so the first child, and all of these names have been changed for confidentiality and privacy and all of that. But the first child, Maddie, was 18 months when she first came to see me. And basically, mom's concern was that she was fairly quiet. And mom had a tongue tie when she was a child, and it was not released or treated until she was in middle school. And it was really problematic for mom, and she remembers it quite well. Well, lo and behold, little Maddie had a tongue tie and a small lip tie. And if you're not familiar with those terms, it's when the tongue, there's a piece of tissue right under the tongue. If you look in the mirror and you raise your tongue, you'll see, and sometimes, and it appears to be happening more and more, and there's, controversies and 2 sides of the argument. And certainly in my career, in 35 years, it seems to be more prevalent today in 2022 and beyond. Some research suggests that there is a certain enzyme that moms are missing, and that these tissues are not being absorbed in utero prior to birth. And so they're holding the tongue down, and there's different classifications. There's 4 classifications. But this little girl, Maddie, had, I would say, a class 2. And so she didn't have a lot of full range of tongue mobility, but Dad didn't want to medically intervene. He was actually interesting. He was a surgeon. So I found that interesting. But all in all, mom had this kind of emotional reaction because of her history, and Dad, for whatever reason, wasn't comfortable and, read the science, and there are success cases on both sides. And so I still look at each and every case individually, and you have to respect the parents' wishes. So we were going to see what we could do in 6 months and then, reconvene with regards to any kind of surgical intervention. The next little guy, Everett, he was 26 months. To me, he was pretty classic in a late talker model. Interestingly enough, he had a twin sister who was the chatty Cathy, and this little guy just kind of took a back seat to her, according to the parents. I did see them on a number of occasions together because, again, the more information that I understand, I can better advise parents. He was also the case where mom on the phone said that he had a chronic kind of drooling and nasal congestion, and he was always going in and out of upper respiratory, not true infections, but just could never clear 100% of his mucus. And he and Dad were both huge milk drinkers. So I just threw out there and said, hey, what if you went 14 days without cow's milk? You can do yogurt, you can do cheese, but just see what happens. And lo and behold, mom took me up on it and stopped all, extra drinking of cow's milk. And this little guy's congestion really, really cleared up. And he stopped, for the most part, snoring. Now, he still was a drooler, and we'll talk about that. But it certainly, Mom was like, wow, this was, amazing. And she did end up going to see a nutritionist and allergist. But for the most part, just stopping, drinking milk really, really helped with that chronic upper respiratory congestion. The fourth little child was Hannah, and she was older. She was about 30 months of age. And to me, she was actually one of my strongest or more challenging kids because she was so strong-willed and very engaged, but refused to talk. And in my practice over the years, I have had maybe two, maybe three, but at least two kind of selective mutism cases. And again, that's a different story. This child was not that. She was very engaged, very connected, but very strong-willed. And so there was a lot of patience needed with her for me, for Mom, who was also expecting her second. But right up front, I realized I have to differentiate and determine, is it a motor-based problem? Is she not talking because she can't articulate or move those fine motor skills to make the sounds? Or is it a phonological, and we'll talk a little bit about that, meaning there are patterns to learning how to speak, like what I said, acquiring vowels and knowing that those are always on every syllable, knowing that words have a beginning and a middle and an end, what the structure is, and that we learn what these phonological, phone just means a sound, right? We have 44 phonemes in English, 26 letters, and 44 sounds that we put together to speak. But there are patterns that we as human beings, I think, miraculously develop and learn. No one sits down and tells a 16-month-old, oh, you need a consonant in the beginning of this word for cat, otherwise it'll be at, and those are two different words. We don't teach word by word and bit by bit. It's a process, right? So I need to figure out, one, why is she not even trying to talk? And yet she did talk at home with Mom, who could decipher her very, very limited number of sounds. And so they had this beautiful dance going back and forth. And somehow I, was intrusive. And so I needed to really gain her confidence and gain her trust. And it took longer than I expected. But Mom, and I were patient, and over time we figured it out. And then the fourth little guy, Ricky, was just barely 16 months. Again, not talking, not making a lot of noise, very sweet, very aware. All of these four kids fit the late talker criteria, that they were engageable, they were aware, they were connected. So that social piece to language and humanness was present. And I thought that he fit pretty well into a late talker classic description. These parents seemed the most unaware of how critical it was to talk with your baby and with your toddler, to really kind of build that language-rich environment. They were very loving. His needs were all met. He was all four of these kids, they were very happy. I mean, little Everett was, I think, the most reserved out of all of these kids. So today's session, I will start with Maddie, the 18-month-old who had the tongue tie. And I'll give you a little background. They were bilingual, and Maddie was receptive to both languages, according to Mom. And I do dive deep into that because I think it's important that parents begin to be comfortable with measuring where they are receptively. And I think if a child is healthy and growing and all of that, they can learn 2 or 3 languages. It takes a little bit more work, a little bit more conscious effort, I think, on the families in this day and age, and a little more tenacity too, because sometimes when a child reaches public school, whether it's daycare or kindergarten, they can pick and choose when they want to use those languages. That's another episode. But in this scenario, this little gal was adorable and really responded receptively to both languages. Dad, I don't think, was bilingual, but there was enough family dynamics in their second language. With that in mind, our first goal was to determine if oral motor skills were a piece to this puzzle or the major piece, right? But with watching her learn how to eat that very first day, or not learn how to eat, but watching her have her snack that very first day, she had great oral motor skills. She did not stuff her mouth. She was able to bite off a wide variety of, like a carrot, I remember, and even a hard-boiled egg. She was able to chew with her lips closed with some prompting. She was only 18 months, but she definitely had a good nasal breathing going. She was able to really enjoy the food in different textures. I remember she had strawberries and a hard-boiled egg and some carrots and some dip. She also had some rolled up meat, so a nice variety of healthy food choices. And Mom reported that she wasn't, a picky eater. She had her food preferences, of course, but she ate what the family ate. All of these things are pieces to the puzzle that I collect to better understand where they are growing and developing. She was also able to sit at the table for a good 10, 12 minutes with the family. And Mom said, being able to socialize and eat and be with that social dynamic at the same time of managing her different food choices and chewing. And she drank from a cup. She also used a straw. I do think there was, I see my notes, a pacifier. And so Mom's goal was by the time her second birthday. Dad wanted it sooner, but again, parents have different choices they have to kind of work through. I did not see a lot of structural concerns or a tongue thrust or an immature swallow. She had a great close the lips and the tongue tip held the food in while she had that back swallow. I didn't see a lot of interference with the pacifier. If anything, it's a lot easier to wean a child off of a pacifier than a thumb or fingers or shirts or any of those things. So together we kind of made a plan, and using her birthday as a marker that she could celebrate and put to rest the pacifier. So that was an important part of it. Again, her receptive language was exceptional, so that made it easier. So our first goal with Maddie was to really get her to try to vocalize and verbalize her primary language, which was English at the time, right? And just to start naming things and trying to put things together and to use it with intention. Sometimes we don't know what the etiology is, but in this case, I think the limited tongue mobility because of the tongue tie could have been a minor inhibiting factor. It didn't seem to affect her chewing and swallowing, so I didn't see too much concern there. What we wanted to make sure, she was also a very tiny petite gal with, tiny nostrils and a tiny mouth and all of that. So we just wanted her to kind of quote unquote find her voice and be expressive. And Mom was very quiet. Dad, was, I think, just kind of average, but they weren't a really chatty family. So they kind of upped their game. They incorporated more songs, more routines. They became a little bit more gregarious in their interactions with Maddie. I think that helped quite a bit. Dad was a little bit more uncomfortable in the beginning. Mom, she was a soft talker and kind of quiet, and she was also a fast talker. So I encouraged Mom to kind of slow it up a little bit just until Maddie really kind of got the rhythm to it. And lo and behold, it really panned out. I think it really helped Maddie kind of find her voice and engage. She was still relatively quiet, but when she did start to talk, and really the key was when she started to put those words together, they were fairly clear. Now, sometimes she would speak in her second language, and I think it would give too much information if I told you what the second language is, but it wasn't French and it wasn't Spanish. It was another third language, but for her privacy, I won't share that. But I do want you to know that sometimes I would hear her second language and I'd look at Mom and she's like, oh no, that's a real word. And so it's really important, us outside people, whether you're a teacher or a doctor or a therapist or a babysitter, that we're aware when there are second languages, because kids will learn both languages simultaneously. And say a child has 400 vocabulary words, 60% of them could be English and 40% could be their second language. And that is still 400 different vocabulary words. So we have to kind of add it up a little bit differently than if we just had a mono language growing child. So on that, we determined by her second birthday, we helped remove her pacifier. And every once in a while she would talk about it, but she knew that it went away, that 2-year-olds, no longer needed it. They kind of put it in a box and put it in the trash can together. But she would make reference about it. Mom said it was very kind of endearing. It was sort of like, her best friend or something, but it did not impact her ability to sleep. One of the other things that Mom and Dad were very, very good at is that once Maddie did fall asleep and the pacifier fell out of her mouth, then they took it away. And so it was specifically weaned for, purpose, and not just, constantly putting in your mouth as a way to intrinsically calm down or rest or transition, that it was more purposeful just for sleep. And that helped with saying goodbye. That certainly does help quite a bit. So we decided at the end of about the 9th month that we would naturally take a break, because they were going on an extended family vacation in the summer in July. And that Maddie was fairly conversational. She was still, I would say, a quiet child, but very capable of asking questions and giving that dialogue back and forth. She probably had a 4 to 5 word utterance. That's what we would say. So the average sentence or phrase would be 4 or 5 words. And she was very engaged and had great social skills, could attend and focus and expand on that conversational flow, that reciprocal asking questions and respond in real time. And she, was able to say, speak up for herself and say no and negotiate. And that's what you want. And so for a 2-year-old to be able to do that, that's pretty typical and healthy and strong and thriving. And so when they came back from vacation in September, I spoke with Mom on the phone, and they were putting her in school, not quite full time, but in preschool, I think 3 half days. And then she had kind of a home daycare for 1 day because Mom's work schedule changed. But I think you can become really creative with stepping outside of the house and giving her that social opportunity with peers her same age. And, I think both mom and dad were very comfortable with how far she's come, and that we didn't have to do anything medical with the tongue tie. I think her oral motor skills really demonstrated good development. We, naturally and I think kindly got rid of the pacifier, and Maddie really, I think, should not have any long-term effects. But always, 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 I say mom should kind of follow up within a year, and especially as she enters her third birthday, because we can do a lot more diagnostic testing. We can really measure how far she's come because we have all of this background information, and just keep monitoring and making sure, because research does indicate that these kids who are slow talkers or late talkers tend to be at a slightly stronger disadvantage or more at risk for having language-based learning problems like literacy or higher order language or memory organization that might not appear until they're in first grade or second grade or third grade. So we just want to continue to monitor and make sure that everything is hunky-dory. So with that, I wanted to close today's episode with Maddie and her great success and her beautiful, family and the wonderful work that they did. And then next episode, we'll cover both or all the other three, Everett, Hannah, and Ricky, that look differently, that present differently. And the outcomes, all of them are positive, but they're different outcomes, right? And so I want mom and dad and grandparents, whoever's listening, to think about these different types of kids and how they present, and what a good evaluation profile looks like, and all the different pieces that have to kind of fit together, and how we as therapists can help connect those dots. But you can ask all these questions too. I will update my checklist for parents and have that link in the description below, so you can begin to ask, where is my child today? What direction are we moving toward, and how can I help? Or how can I gather more information so if I do decide to pick up the phone and call someone, or, really defend where my child is, that he or she is in an excellent place and doesn't need intervention, then I have a checklist to support what my mom gut is telling me. So thanks again for sharing your precious time with me. I know this is a busy time of the year. This should come out at the end of December, early January. But please, if you're finding benefit, share with your friends and family. And don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you have a quick minute, leave an honest review and help me understand what your questions are and how I can serve you better. Help me extend my reach and connect with new moms just like you. My goal in the new year 2023 is to reach 10,000 new moms and really help you all take charge, guide your children with confidence so that they're healthy, happy, and thriving in 2023 and beyond. All right. Take care, Happy New Year, and God bless.